Hello everyone, I'm back with another Reddit Addicts episode. If you find my videos entertaining, please kindly subscribe and like them. Thanks to everyone for your suggestions and kind notes. Now, let's get started with today's exciting stories.
I 46M hate to admit it, but I used to read some posts here. I read them and I felt good about myself. I felt lucky, like I had everything and that I would never encounter myself in the same situation that I used to read about. I was wrong. My story with my wife 46F begins in the 70s. My parents immigrated from Brazil to the US in 1970. They met another couple that had immigrated from Brazil a few years earlier and had just moved to Dallas. They became really close friends. 2 years after that, they opened a business together. In 73, that couple got pregnant around the same time. My mom also got pregnant. I was born 4 days earlier than my wife. Our families didn't have any extended family in the US. So we were each other's family. Basically, her mom used to babysit me while my mom worked. And since I'm an only child and her sisters were born 8 years later, we were basically raised together. We were inseparable, basically joined by the hip, as my mom used to say. Our parents used to take vacations together. And when my parents took vacations, they used to take her with us. We used to have barbecues every weekend, and we always went together to church on Sunday. We were best friends. I asked her on a date when we were 13. And we discovered love together. Our relationship was actually very mature, given our ages. We were best friends, so it wasn't that different. We went to the same college. I proposed to her in 94. We got married in 95, went to the same college. After we graduated, she started her own business, and I started helping our dads and their business. We had our first daughter in 98. Soon after, we had 3 more: 20F, 20F, 18F. It was like a dream. We were so happy. We were living our best life. We both have very good salaries. We live extremely comfortably, multiple properties, including some in Europe, vacations twice a year. Our bed life was healthy. We indulged in each other. Kings had love normally 3 times a week. We both professed how much we love each other every single day. It was like a dream. This year, I started noticing some changes in her. She started spending more time working. She was always on her phone. We stopped having lice. We started arguing all the time about things we normally would never argue. She started being called to me. We talked about this. She told me that this year was really stressful to her. She started acting more normal, but something was off. Even our daughters realized that. I just didn't know what it was. Last week was when I finally realized that something was very wrong. My brother-in-law 36M, brother 29M, tried to end his life 5 days ago, which was surprising to everyone. He definitely doesn't seem like he was depressed or anything like that. My wife and I are very close to brother-in-law family. So we were all very shocked. He wasn't able to end his own life, but it was close. Brother-in-law found him in his garage with the Quran. It was a very close call, but they are expecting him to make a full recovery. My wife was very weird during this whole thing, constant mood swings, crying all the time. We were all sad, but she was more effective than she should have been. Then 3 days ago, my brother-in-law told me the truth about his brother ending. My wife and his brother, who was 17 younger than me, had been having an affair for almost 11 months. Apparently last week, he tried to convince my wife to leave me for him. My wife ended their relationship and he tried to end his own life. I confronted my wife after hearing this, and to my surprise, she confessed, "Yes, I was honestly hoping that he was wrong and that his brother was lying. I am that naive." She broke down crying that she didn't know why she did this. She called it a midlife crisis, saying that it was nothing wrong with us, that she still loved me. I ended up almost having a panic attack. I just didn't know what to do, just packed a bag with some clothes and just stormed off. She tried to stop me, but I got in my car and drove away for almost 8 hours. I stopped when I realized that I was in Memphis already. I've been staying in a hotel since that day. Everyone has been blowing my phone. Apparently my daughters now know, because my wife told them, which just makes this thing even more humiliating. I talked to my eldest, just told her that I am safe and don't want to talk to anyone. My wife and her family have been calling nonstop. I have more than 100 missed calls and 1,000 plus unread messages. My other daughters are also desperate, but I just can't bring myself to talk to them. For the last 2 days, I have already drunk 2 bottles of wine and 1 bottle of whiskey. I just can't stop crying. I feel absolutely lost. I know my wife for my entire life. I know her since she was barely 1 day old. We had our first picture together when she was 2 days old. Now, every time I think about her, I feel like throwing up. What did I do wrong? What the heck I'm supposed to do? Update. Hi everyone, a lot happened during these last few days. I decided to sober up and go back home on the 23rd. I was not in a good mental state to drive, so I ended up hiring someone to drive me back to Dallas. I avoided everyone when I arrived there. I just wanted to see my daughters and my dogs. I asked my youngest to warn my wife that I didn't want to see her, and she went to stay with her parents. For sake of understanding, I will name my daughters. The oldest is Sarah. The twins are Amanda and Amelia, and my youngest is Emily. My daughters were basically my shadows growing up. I'm extremely close to the twins and Emily. Sarah is a different story. We were very close when she was a kid. Once she was around 17 to 18. She started acting out and put a lot of distance between us, since that she kept getting closer and closer with her mother and more distant for me. I've tried several times to bond with her, but she always kept me at arm's length. When I got home, I told my daughters that I had arrived and went to see my dogs. They arrived shortly after. They were all very emotional. We talked for hours. I admit that I cried a bit a lot. We hugged together. I received tons of kisses. They were very surprised at how their mother could do something like that to me. They said that it changed how they view their mother, that went on and on with them, basically talking about their mother in a very unpleasant way. It was a bit shocking. To be honest, I felt extremely uncomfortable hearing them saying that stuff about her in normal circumstances. I would never allow them to speak about her in that way. I was very surprised at how vocal they were. Especially Sarah. Sarah adored her mother. They were very close, and even though she saw the mess her reaction felt strange. We ordered dinner, had a nice meal together, laughed a bit. I decided to drink a bit to numb myself before bed, drank a little too much, and went to sleep. Sarah woke me up. She told me that she was having trouble sleeping and asked me if she could sleep with me that night. I was very surprised. She was a very sick kid growing up. She was diagnosed with leukemia when she was barely 3, and she had problems sleeping on her own until she was almost 8. The only way she could fall asleep was with her head on my chest. She got on the bed, snuggled with me, her head on my chest, just like when she was a kid. I was almost sleeping again when she began crying. She was basically having a panic attack, mumbling words I just couldn't understand in Portuguese. We have this habit in the family. My parents, when they were really excited or emotional, started speaking Portuguese out of nowhere, my daughters, and I inherited that as well. She kept saying that it was all her fault, that she was sorry for doing that to me. Eventually, the others woke up and I was able to calm down Sarah. Eventually, they started speaking. It was all in Portuguese, so I will try to summarize the whole thing. Apparently 7 months ago, Amelia went back home earlier one day and caught my wife and brother-in-law in the act. My wife begged her to not tell anyone, which obviously meant that Amelia told Amanda and that Amanda told Emily, which meant that Anna told Emily. They just can't keep a secret between themselves. Sarah confronted my wife and she gave all sorts of excuses. In the end, she promised Sarah that she would stop and begged her to not tell me. Sarah was able to convince the rest of the girls to not tell me to make things even worse. My wife is not even a little smart. 2 months after Amelia found her in our house, Emily catched them in my wife's car. Cue the same thing. My wife begging our girls to not tell me that she was just weak, that she still loved me, and couldn't afford to lose me. Sarah was able to convince the rest of the girls to not tell me again. They were all crying and hugging me at that point. Sarah was hugging me so tightly that I honestly thought my ribs would break at any moment. Then it started making sense. My parents were quite wealthy. My wife's parents were not when it came to parenting our kids. I always spoiled them a bit too much. It was one of the biggest reasons that my wife and I used to argue about. We eventually agreed that spoiling them too much would not be wise. But this year was different. My wife went against everything we had discussed before. In June, she gave Sarah a new car without even discussing things with me, a Model S, not a cheap one. 2 months ago, my wife bought an apartment in Boston for the twins because apparently living in the dorm was really stressful. Again, she didn't discuss this with me. The issue was not the money. My wife and I are very successful. But out of nowhere, she started giving them gifts. These two are the biggest examples because some fights between us, but her excuse was always the same: 2020 was being really hard on them. I asked them point blank that the reason their mother was giving them those gifts was to keep them quiet. They didn't answer. They just said that they didn't want to hurt me. I admit that at that point I lost my temper. I just told them, and not a very nice way to get out of the house. I packed my things, got my dogs and drove to Marshall on a ranch outside the city. It's a miracle that I didn't end up dead, considering that I was definitely not even a little sober against the odds. I arrived safely there. For the first time in 46 years, I almost spent Christmas alone. That there he was, my new best friend, a bottle of Blue Label. We haven't met before, but I got to say we actually bonded pretty well through the holidays. I was a mess. I cried more in the next 5 days than I had cried before in my entire life. It was definitely not pretty. The only thing that kept me sane was my dogs. I honestly didn't know what to do. I kept asking myself, what did I want it to do at that point, and the only thing that crossed my mind was visiting my parents. My mom passed in 2013. She was hit by a drunk driver and didn't survive the accident. My dad passed only 4 months after that. He lost his battle to lung disease after treatment for almost 4 years. My mom wanted to be buried in the city. She was born in Brazil and my dad wanted the same, so I buried them there. It was hell. I was very attached to my parents and I didn't have a place to speak with them. I have Brazilian citizenship since my parents were born there. Got a COVID test, which followed the recent trend in my life and came back negative. Bought a ticket. 13 hours later I arrived in Brazil. 8 hours after that I arrived in the city where my parents are buried. Small city, less than 20,000 inhabitants. I spent NYU drinking scotch with my parents. I could feel my dad's disappointment from beyond his grave. Surprisingly creepy. I miss him. That's where I'm so far. My phone was blowing up with calls and text messages from everyone. So I just decided to not recharge it anymore. Not sure how I'm going to proceed. I'm just thinking in my own misery at this point, living day by day. Happy New Year.
We hope you enjoyed this story. Thanks for watching and hope to see you in the next video. And before you go, please be sure to subscribe for more.